To say that the Russian Revolution changed the world is the understatement of the century, because in just 5 years, a crumbling empire became the world's first communist state. And within decades, half the planet would live under that idea, but what if that revolution had failed? No Lenin, no Soviet Union, no Cold War. What if the Bolsheviks were crushed, and the Romanovs replaced not by Lenin and his Bolsheviks, but by something else? In this alternate timeline, Russia loses the 1917 revolution, and everything changes. In our history, the Bolsheviks rise in October 1917, win a brutal civil war, and form the USSR. But in this version, they don't make it past 1920. Instead, Russia fractures. Liberal Democrats, monarchists, generals, and regional leaders all fight for control. And from the chaos, a different Russia emerges. Weaker, yes, but more open to the world. And without the Soviet threat, the 20th century takes a very different shape. So, what happens when the red tide is stopped before it even begins? Let's find out. It begins the same. February 1917. Tsar Nicholas II abdicates. A provisional government forms, promising democracy. But by October, the Bolsheviks stage their coup and seize power. At least they try. In our timeline, the Bolsheviks catch the provisional government flat-footed. But in this alternate timeline, they face a more organized opposition. The military doesn't fracture. Key garrisons in Petrograd and Moscow remain loyal to the Republic. Lenin is wounded during an early failed uprising. Trotsky is arrested. The Bolsheviks are driven underground. Their revolution? Stillborn. The provisional government, seeing the threat clearly, begins a campaign of political consolidation. It opens negotiations with moderate socialists and the cadets to establish a broader coalition. The Russian Constituent Assembly is convened earlier than in our timeline and survives, just barely. A constitution is drafted, establishing a parliamentary republic with limited executive powers. It's messy, it's fragile, but it prevents collapse. The Russian Civil War still happens, but this time, it's not reds versus whites. It's chaos versus order. The provisional government remains in place but weak. Monarchist generals like Kornilov and Denikin build their own power bases. In the east, Admiral Kolchak declares himself supreme ruler of Russia. Ukraine declares independence. Finland breaks away. Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan do the same. Central Asia sees revolts, with leaders in Bukhara and Khiva seeking autonomy. But without a unifying red threat, these groups don't rally together. There is no USSR. There is no Lenin. There is only fragmentation. By 1920, the former Russian Empire is a patchwork. Republics, military zones, breakaway states. Western powers intervene in some regions. Japan occupies parts of the Far East. Britain supports Baku. Poland pushes east, clashing with Belarusian and Russian forces. And Moscow? Controlled by a centrist reformist republic struggling to hold what's left. The Civil War becomes a mosaic of localized conflicts, none large enough to reunify the country, but all too disorganized to offer lasting peace. Without a centralized Soviet state, Russia's ability to project power is gone. The communist movement loses momentum worldwide. Germany sees fewer communist uprisings. China's revolution stalls. The Comintern never exists. Marxism loses its key sponsor. Instead of red flags, the 1920s in Eastern Europe are marked by instability, but also new opportunity. Ukraine grows closer to Poland. The Baltics consolidate independence. A Caucasus confederation briefly forms, seeking trade and military assistance from France and Britain. The provisional government, or what remains of it, establishes a nominal capital in Yaroslavl. There, under international pressure, a series of reforms are enacted. Land redistribution, minority language rights, and a new federal framework. Western Europe breathes a sigh of relief, but some fear the power vacuum. And so begins a race, not between ideologies, but between failed states. The League of Nations sends observers. France arms friendly republics. Britain funds railroads in the Caucasus. The United States remains largely distant, though American companies begin investing in oil fields around Baku. In our timeline, Hitler rose to power in part by positioning himself as the ultimate enemy of communism. In this world, he still rises, but with a slightly different narrative. Without the Soviet Union to rail against, Nazi rhetoric focuses more on Slavic inferiority, territorial destiny, and anti-Semitism. Lebensraum remains a core tenet, but now it targets a more disorganized East. When Germany remilitarizes, there is no strong Russia to stop them. Poland may expand its influence in the East, perhaps even forming a federation with Lithuania and Ukraine, but it cannot stop a mechanized Wehrmacht alone. Would Hitler invade a fractured Russia anyway? Likely. The resource-rich lands of Ukraine and the Caucasus are too tempting, but it would be less of a war, and more of a campaign of annexation, with puppet states and collaborators installed. Meanwhile, Western Europe grows nervous. Without a balance in the East, Germany may grow unchecked. France fortifies the Maginot Line. Britain rethinks appeasement. This is where the real divergence begins. No Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. No Soviet invasion of Poland. No winter war with Finland. No division of Eastern Europe into Nazi and Soviet spheres. Nazi Germany likely attacks westward first. France, Belgium, the Netherlands. But without the USSR on the other side of Poland, Britain and France may be more willing to defend the East early on. Alternatively, Hitler could overreach, sending troops deep into a disorganized Russian frontier, attempting to secure oil fields, grain supplies, and strategic depth. But there's no Stalin to rally troops, no Siberian reinforcements, no Battle of Stalingrad. Would Germany win? Possibly, at first, but they would face a different challenge: occupation, not of one state, but of dozens of fragile, fragmented republics. Resistance would be fierce, supply lines overstretched. The United States still enters the war, but its involvement focuses more on Europe and the Pacific. Without the Eastern Front draining Nazi strength, D-Day might come later, or be bloodier. Post-war borders would look radically different. Perhaps Eastern Europe is redrawn entirely. Poland might be larger. Ukraine might be independent. The Caucasus might host Western-friendly states. And when the dust settles, there's no Iron Curtain, no Eastern Bloc, no Berlin Wall. Instead, Eastern Europe is a mosaic of recovering nations, backed not by Moscow, but by Western alliances. A fragile balance forms, not Cold War tension, but decentralized fragmentation. The United States still drops atomic bombs in 1945, but there's no arms race, no nuclear parity, no Cuban Missile Crisis, and no NATO, at least not as we know it. Instead, a pan-European defense pact emerges, possibly led by Britain and France. The Warsaw Pact never forms. Eastern Europe gradually gravitates toward Western norms. Without the Soviet threat, the world develops more slowly, but maybe more peacefully. The ideological divide never hardens. Proxy wars in Asia and Africa are fewer. And Russia? It eventually stabilizes, perhaps as a federation, perhaps as a loose republic, but never again as a global superpower. Regional powers like Ukraine, Kazakhstan, and Georgia carve out their own paths. The Cold War never comes, but the long winter of Russian instability? That might last even longer. History is built on hinge moments, and in 1917, the Bolsheviks slammed that door open. But in this world, it stayed closed, and everything, from Berlin to Beijing, changed with it.